Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the most disturbing facts buried inside Elden Ring's lore. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The body beneath the beauty. When Elden Ring first shows you the lands between, it offers you something rare from a video game. Genuine, breathtaking scale. A golden tree so large it fills the sky. Rolling fields that seem to glow. Architecture built by people who believed they were constructing paradise. And then, slowly, the more you look, the more the beauty begins to curdle. Tonight, we're going into the places the game doesn't explain. The details it hides beneath item descriptions and half-spoken dialogue. The things that make this world genuinely disturbing the deeper you go. We begin, as Elden Ring so often does, with what happens to the human body when someone pursues power without any consideration for the cost. Sellen's final form. There is a moment in Sorceress Sellen's questline that rewards you for helping her achieve everything she wanted. She retakes the Academy of Raya Lucaria. She promises allegiance to you as Elden Lord. She thanks you and asks you to return when you're ready. You rest at a site of grace. You come back, and she is gone. In her place, pressed into the corner of the room, is a massive sphere of fused glintstone crowns and human faces moaning softly when you approach. That is Sellen, the primeval current she pursued her entire life, the forbidden sorcery she was exiled for studying, the truth she sacrificed everything to reach. It consumed her. The tradition she revived involves collecting living sorcerers and fusing them together into what practitioners call seeds of stars. Before her exile, Sellen did this to her fellow students. That is why she was called the Graven Witch. That is why she was banished. And in the end, having finally achieved what she always wanted, standing at the top of the academy, holding access to the primeval current in both hands, she became what she made. The Graven School Talisman describes the process plainly. To those who follow the primeval current, fusing the bodies of sorcerers into the seeds of stars is simply another path of scientific inquiry. Sellen believed that until it was too late to believe anything else. She cannot speak after the transformation. She only wails when you touch her. The woman who taught you your first advanced sorceries, who called you her student, with something approaching warmth, spends the rest of the game as an agonized mass of stone faces in the corner of a room where she once stood triumphant. Rennala's amber egg. Rennala, queen of the full moon, cradles an amber egg throughout the entirety of her boss fight. It is the gift her husband Radagon left when he abandoned her for Marika. When she performs rebirths for you after her defeat, she uses it to remake your body from the inside. What most players never see is what is actually inside it. Data miners who have peeled back the cutscene version of the egg found something that was almost certainly removed from general view on purpose. The egg contains malformed baby-sized juvenile scholars. They are nude, barely defined, without legs. They are growing inside it. Rennala is not merely using the egg as a conduit for the great rune within it. She is gestating the scholars she rebirths over and over again, physically growing them inside an amber womb gifted to her by the man who left. The version players interact with day to day contains vein-like growths and white bulbs, the evidence of what it contains without the full revelation. The designers apparently decided showing it plainly was too much and hid it in cutscene-only geometry most players would never access. What they left visible is disturbing enough. What they chose to obscure is somehow worse. The eternal rebirth trap. The juvenile scholars fighting for Rennala during her boss fight are not simply her followers. They are her children, born and reborn through the amber egg, endlessly cycling through existence. The item description for their cap tells you everything in a single line. Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion. Every single time one of them dies, Rennala rebirths them. Every time they return, they have lost another layer of who they were. They cannot stand. They crawl across the floor. They sing a lullaby, sleep tight, bound tight, in mother's amber, in voices that are deliberately childlike, even though they may have been adult scholars once. They have become utterly dependent on the rebirth process, unable to exist without it, unable to fully exist within it. They are people in the process of being slowly erased, one resurrection at a time, and the woman doing it to them has no idea she is causing harm. To Rennala, they are her sweetings. She calls them that with genuine tenderness. She is not a monster. She is a woman so shattered by grief that she turned inward, and the people closest to her are the ones being consumed by the fallout, the seeds of stars made of people. Before Sellen, before her exile, someone had to invent the process that would eventually destroy her. The graven mages. You find scattered throughout Raya Lucaria and beyond are the legacy of the Academy's founding primeval sorcerers who developed the concept of collecting scholars and fusing them into spherical masses they called seeds of stars. These creatures are made entirely of human faces pressed together, wearing the glintstone crowns of different academic factions. They are not constructs built from materials. They are people. They are multiple people, compressed and merged and partially conscious, hovering in a state of terrible becoming. The founding sorcerers believed this was a valid research methodology. Rennala banned it when she took control of the Academy. The ban held until Sellen revived the practice and began doing it to her peers, earning her title of Graven Witch. Every ball of moaning faces you encounter in the depths of the Academy is the end result of someone deciding that other human beings were appropriate raw materials for transcendence. Rykard's willing dissolution. Most people who meet the god-devouring serpent of Volcano Manor encounter it as a boss fight with spectacular magma attacks and a voice that sounds genuinely delighted by violence. What the encounter doesn't explain in the moment is that Praetor Rykard is not being controlled by the serpent. He fed himself to it intentionally. He chose to be devoured. He climbed into its mouth as a philosophical act, believing that fusing with a creature that could swallow gods was the truest possible act of rebellion against the Golden Order. And the serpent absorbed him. Their personalities merged. You can hear Rykard speaking through the serpent's body during the fight, languid, amused, inviting you to share in his feast. The Rykard's Rancor spell describes the souls of the champions he devoured still crying out in torment within him, a detail that strongly suggests what he calls becoming kin is something considerably less comfortable for the people involved. His arena is filled with the remains of those who accepted that invitation. Corpse pillars, piles of bodies, the physical record of years of consumption. Rykard believes he is building a family. The evidence left behind is harder to read as anything other than a graveyard. Godrick's systematic harvest. Roderika, one of the few survivors you find in Stormvale Castle, tells you what happened to the people who followed Godrick there. Everyone who came with him, she says, everyone who crossed the sea for him, who fought for him, had their arms taken, their legs taken, their heads taken and stuck to the spider. She delivers this with a flatness that suggests she has processed the horror into something close to numbness. The grafted mass that constitutes Godrick's body in the boss fight is the physical record of how many people that represents, limbs from dozens of individuals accumulated into a single, rolling, swinging catastrophe. The grafted scions you encounter throughout Stormvale are the products of his smaller experiments. Bodies fused into new configurations, loyal to nothing except the master who assembled them. Godrick does this because he is genuinely, profoundly insecure. He is the weakest of the demigods, a distant relation to Godfrey with diluted divine blood, and he compensates by accumulating the strength of others rather than developing his own. The tragedy is not that he is evil. The tragedy is that the Golden Order produced a man so convinced of his own inadequacy that he dismantled everyone around him, trying to fill a gap that more bodies could not close. Rykard's man-serpent experiments. Volcano Manor is, at its heart, an active laboratory for body modification horror. The man-serpents that patrol its halls and the volcanic fields outside were confirmed as Rykard's creations. The God-devouring serpent fandom wiki specifically notes that Rykard and the serpent engaged in an appalling birthing ritual that spawned the man-serpents. That phrase, appalling birthing ritual, is doing a great deal of work. What it implies about the mechanics of their creation, and what that process looked like inside Prison Town, with its dismembered albinorics and torture frames, is something the game wisely chooses not to illustrate in full. What you see in the dungeon below, the frames, the tables, the Godskin noble's presence as a specialist in reshaping flesh, constitutes the evidence of that ritual's infrastructure. The man-serpents walking freely through Rykard's manor are loyal to him because he is their closest approximation of a father. He built them, they worship him, and when you arrive as the Tarnished and disrupt that order, they defend it with a ferocity that makes a terrible kind of sense. You are killing the only god they have ever known. The Abductor Virgin's true design. The Iron Maiden-like machines that prowl Raya Lucaria and Volcano Manor are called Abductor Virgins, and their function is printed plainly in their design. They open, they take people inside, and they close. When they close on you as an enemy, it kills you. When they close on prisoners bound for Volcano Manor, it transports them. These devices are the Golden Order's inquisitorial technology, originally designed to collect people accused of heresy and deliver them to Rykard's chambers for processing. The bladed wheels on their bodies, matching the weapon carried by the Inquisitor Giza inside the manor, are instruments of torture adapted into locomotion. They were built by people who thought this was the appropriate way to move human beings from one location to another. The fact that you can be swallowed by one in Raya Lucaria and deposited in Volcano Manor isn't a glitch. It's the system working exactly as intended, and you just happen to be made of sterner stuff than most of the people who took that same journey. Prison Town's vivisection evidence. Below Volcano Manor, nestled in the caldera of Mount Gelmir, lies a town that is also a prison, that is also an operating theatre. Prison Town contains albinorics pinned to wooden frames, unable to move or escape. It contains human figures stretched on tables with instruments nearby. It contains the albinoric mask, a face covering clearly fashioned from an albinoric's own face, left near a rack stained with blood. The implication the environmental storytelling draws is not subtle. These people were experimented upon, dissected in some cases, and the results were used to build whatever Rykard was building in that volcano. The man-serpent guards walking past these scenes as if they are unremarkable is its own kind of horror, normalization made visible. the Godskin noble's presence here gains a new dimension when you understand he was not just visiting but working, harvesting material from Rykard's victims for his own cult's purposes, while Rykard harvested from their union. Two predators with a neat division of labor, using an entire town's worth of captive people as shared resources. The Godskin noble's side business. The Godskin noble at Volcano Manor is not simply an ally of convenience. The Albinoric mask's item description notes that the skinwork found in Prison Town is far from the craft of the Godskins, a pale imitation of their art. This phrasing implies the noble found the skins of Rykard's victims interesting enough to study, even if he considered them below his usual standard. The Godskins are a religious order whose vestments are literally made from the skins of slain gods, and whose stretching techniques were their sacred preparation methods. Finding one of them operating inside Rykard's torture complex points toward an arrangement. Rykard provides subjects, the noble contributes expertise. Both parties benefit from the transaction. What the noble may have received beyond the practice opportunity was access to Rykard himself, a being whose serpent body could arguably regenerate material continuously. The game does not spell this out, but the pairing of a skin cult and a man-serpent, with an endless supply of victims in a torture dungeon, is not coincidence. Two predators, each with something the other needs, using an entire town's worth of captive people as shared resources. Tanith's final meal. When you defeat Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, you can return to the Volcano Manor to find Tanith, his consort, kneeling over his remains. She is eating him. She is tearing pieces from his corpse and consuming them without speaking, without acknowledging you, without stopping. Her knight stands nearby, preventing interference. Tanith was a dancer from a distant land who became Rykard's devoted partner and the administrator of his murder mansion, recruiting champions to be devoured by the serpent god she loved. When you destroy that god, she does the only thing that apparently makes sense to her. She ensures some part of him continues by taking him inside herself. There is no dialogue tree for this moment. There is nothing to say. She is not mad in the way the game usually presents madness. She is simply performing the ultimate act of devotion available to her, in the only language she and Rykard ever shared. The lands between is full of love stories. This is one of the most sincere ones. It is also one of the most difficult to look at directly. Godwyn's conscious decomposition. Godwyn the Golden was the first demigod to die, but only his soul died. His body lived on, abandoned by its animating spirit, and began to change. In deep-root depths, what was once a golden prince has become something that grows through the earth's foundations like a tumor. His face appears on the surfaces of Erdtree roots in multiple locations. He has developed fish-like features as his corpse transforms into something the lore has no proper name for. The most unsettling implication, one the game never confirms but seems to invite, is that something of Godwyn's awareness may linger. Not his soul, which is genuinely gone, but some residual impression distributed across his spreading, ever-growing flesh. An echo of consciousness trapped in a body with no soul to direct it. Whether this is true, or whether the faces in the roots are simply biological horror without inner experience, is something the game withholds deliberately. What it shows is a body that will not stop, pressing his face up through roots and stone across the entire underground of the world he was once beloved in, growing into every corner of the system, meant to process the dead, too present to be ignored and too incomplete to be addressed. The lake beneath Liurnia, one of Elden Ring's most elegantly hidden environmental horrors, is the relationship between one of its most beautiful regions and one of its most terrible. Liurnia of the Lakes is a hauntingly gorgeous area, shallow lakes reflecting golden light, crumbling spires, a sense of melancholy grandeur. And it is slowly sinking. The buildings lean and settle. The roads disappear into water. The foundations are failing. What no surface observation reveals, but what the underground geography of the game makes plain, is that directly beneath Liurnia sits the Lake of Rot, where the outer god of scarlet rot was sealed. The rot leaks upward. It dissolves the geological foundation of the region above it. Every crumbling tower in Liurnia, every road that has subsided into the shallow lakes, every settlement slowly swallowed by the earth. It is all a consequence of an imprisoned god slowly eating the ground from below, and the people living above it have no idea. Marika pinned to the Erd Tree. When you reach the inner sanctum of the Erd Tree and find Marika, she is not sitting on a throne. She is not standing, waiting. She is crucified. Her body is pinned to the Erd Tree in a pose that mirrors the crucifix shape scattered across the landscape of the lands between. The same image that appears on the summoning pool icons, on the screaming bodies bound to crosses in Limgrave, on Marika's own seal. She has been imprisoned by the greater will for shattering the Elden Ring, held in divine custody inside the very tree she was supposed to embody. The god who built the Golden Order, who shaped the cosmology of an entire world, is being kept alive as a vessel against her will, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything except exist as a container for the Elden beast within her. The crucifix imagery isn't decoration. Marika made it her symbol because she was already wearing it. Every instance of that shape across the lands between is a quiet reminder that the goddess at the center of this world's faith is a prisoner being held up as an example. The ulcerated tree spirit's unknown origin. The long, serpentine creatures made of what appears to be rotting golden wood that burst from the ground in certain legacy dungeons are called ulcerated tree spirits, and they are one of the game's more unsettling monsters once you start considering what they might be. The game never provides a direct explanation for their origin. The wiki itself notes that most information about them is conjectural. What we can observe is that they are consistently found near the Erd Tree and its roots, that they drop golden seeds, and that their bodies resemble branches or roots corrupted into something animate and hostile. Based on their placement and appearance, one reasonable reading is that they represent some kind of failed spiritual merger with the Erd Tree's divine essence. Beings or spirits that became entangled with the tree's root system and were twisted rather than absorbed. Their thrashing, writhing movement has the character of something that has never been comfortable in the form it inhabits. Every ulcerated tree spirit is a question the game refuses to answer directly. A creature shaped by the Erd Tree's presence in ways that imply something went profoundly wrong, without ever telling you precisely what. Sellen's travelling soul. Before her final transformation into the Graven Mass, Sellen had already done something remarkable and disturbing with her own body. She placed her soul into a primal glintstone, a gem that can contain a sorcerer's consciousness, allowing herself to project into a secondary body located in Waypoint ruins, while her original body remained shackled in Witchbane ruins. When you meet her initially, you are meeting a soul inhabiting a spare vessel. Her real body, the one the Academy bound and left to rot as punishment, is elsewhere, deteriorating. The practice is described as distasteful even by those who study forbidden sorcery. What it means in practice is that Sellen has been living as a ghost haunting someone else's body for an indeterminate period, separated from her own flesh, unable to touch, fully present, entirely displaced. The fact that she speaks warmly, teaches willingly, and seems to have found a kind of peace in her situation makes it more unsettling than if she had seemed distressed. She adapted. People can adapt to almost anything. The brainwashed ants. This one is easy to miss because it requires you to look carefully at a mount. You are probably busy trying to avoid being crushed by. In Noxtella, the soldiers who ride giant ants as cavalry are not doing so through any kind of natural bond or trained relationship. The ants are being controlled. If you look at the eyes of the mounted ants and compare them to the eyes of unmounted ants in the same area, the mounted ones have a visible pink gloom over their eyes, the visible signature of whatever coercive magic the riders are using on them. The ants did not volunteer for this. They were taken and modified, their agency removed, their enormous bodies converted into war vehicles for soldiers they had no relationship with. The riders, meanwhile, seem entirely unconcerned with this distinction. In a game full of people whose wills have been overridden by gods and outer forces, the ants are a small, easy-to-miss reminder that the compulsion of unwilling creatures runs all the way down to the insects. Larval tears as living organisms. Every time you pay Rennala a larval tear to be reborn, you are handing her a creature. The item description is explicit. A larval tear is a core of a creature of mimicry known as a silver tear, and is described as much a substance as it is a living organism. The silver tears you fight throughout Nokron and Noxtella are alive. They feel, they react, they mimic you with enough fidelity that the mimic tear boss fight is unsettling specifically because it knows what you look like. What the rebirth process requires is harvesting the core from one of these creatures, killing it to extract what it is made of, and using that material as fuel to remake your body entirely. The act of leveling up, of choosing who you want to be, is underwritten by the deaths of countless small silver beings who never did anything except try to survive in an underground city that the Greater Will had already decided to forget about. Hyetta's grapes, Lightseeker. Hyetta asks you to bring her Shabriri grapes throughout her questline, following a pilgrimage across the lands between driven by blind faith. She cannot see, and the grapes give her a kind of inner light, a warm, searing glow that she describes as beautiful. She tells you they taste delectably tender and sweet. She is grateful for each one. She thanks you for the guidance. The Shabriri grapes are rotting human eyeballs, harvested from people driven to madness by the frenzied flame. The yellowed, clouded orbs that Hyetta places in her mouth and consumes with pleasure were once the eyes of someone who encountered the three fingers and did not survive the encounter intact. You know this. The game tells you this in the item description. Hyetta does not know. At one point during her questline, she wonders aloud what exactly the grapes are, and you have the option to tell her. She retches. She goes silent for a while, and then she continues her pilgrimage anyway, because she has decided that the face she follows is worth what it costs. Even this, the compelled pilgrim consuming the eyes of the mad, is one of the most quietly awful images in a game that does not lack for competition. Seluvis's puppet seller, the preceptor. Seluvis presents himself as an arrogant but functional member of Ranni's faction, a sorcerer with poor people skills and useful knowledge. Beneath his tower, accessible only through an illusory floor, is a room containing his real project. Lifelike human figures stand frozen in posed positions, wearing expressions of blank stillness. A message on the wall reads, Seluvis's puppet. Do not touch. These are people. These are former people. Seluvis brews a draught using starlight shards that reduces the drinker to this state. Conscious enough to be posed, hollow enough to comply, entirely stripped of will. He offers you one of them as a gift when you discover his collection, as if distributing a person is simply a form of hospitality. His ultimate goal, revealed across his quest line, was to brew a version of this draught potent enough to work on a demigod. His target was Ranni herself, the mistress he publicly served. He wanted to turn her into one of those figures in that cellar. The dungeon beneath his tower is not a secret hobby. It is a prototype. Seluvis may have always been a puppet. The most unsettling detail in Seluvis's entire storyline is not what he does to others, but what may have been done to him. At the end of his quest line, you find him dead, but not fallen, not crumpled. He is kneeling, frozen in the exact pose as the puppets in his cellar. Both Seluvis and his servant Pydia share a voice actor in the original game files, with Pydia's dialogue nested within Seluvis's data. This, combined with his kneeling death pose, has led to a widely supported reading of the character. Preceptor Seluvis was never the puppet master. He was the puppet. Pydia, his supposedly subservient carrion servant, was the one truly in control. The man who spent his life reducing others to hollow dolls may have been one himself, collecting victims for a master he was never permitted to be aware of. When Ranni severs her connection and Seluvis dies, Pydia dies too, not from grief, but because the mechanism through which he operated ceased to function. Two figures, one string. The Juvenile Scholar's Lullaby. During Rennala's boss fight, amid the chaos of flying books and fire-breathing scholars and collapsing chandeliers, there is a detail that is almost impossible to catch in the moment. The Juvenile Scholars sing. The words, extracted from the game's audio, are "Sleep tight, bound tight, in Mother's amber. Sleep tight, find life by Mother's amber." They are children, or things that were made to be children, things that remember being scholars. Crawling on the floor of a library, unable to stand upright, singing a lullaby to comfort a woman who does not know she is the source of their suffering. They wrote a song about their own imprisonment and set it to a lullaby melody. And they sing it with real devotion, with voices that are genuinely soft and gentle, while attacking you on her behalf. The cognitive dissonance of the scene, the tenderness of the singing, the horror of what the singing describes, is one of the most precisely designed disturbing moments in the game. The lullaby works. It is soothing. You can feel why they sing it, and that is the most unsettling thing about it. Rennala's rebirth addiction. The Juvenile Scholar set description explains the mechanism of Rennala's rebirth in a single devastating sentence. Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion. These scholars have been reborn so many times that they no longer have stable identities. Each death erases another layer. They are becoming less themselves with every resurrection. They cannot stop because they are now dependent on the process. Without the rebirth, they cannot maintain coherent existence. Rennala does not know this is happening, or does not recognize it as harm. She calls them her sweetings. She speaks to them with what sounds like genuine maternal warmth. But she has been doing this to them for an unknown length of time, cycling them through death and imperfect return, each cycle a little more erosive, until what sits in that library are not scholars or children, but thin remaining copies of people, dependent on the woman destroying them for continued existence, singing her comfort while they slowly disappear. Miquella's engineered love. One of the most unsettling implications woven through Elden Ring's lore is that Miquella, the figure consistently presented as the Lands Between's most genuinely compassionate being, may have been constructing the devotion everyone felt toward him rather than earning it. The bewitching branch, an item directly connected to Miquella, is described as a tool that can compel the affection of those it touches. The Cleanrot Knights, who willingly infected themselves with scarlet rot to remain at Melinia's side, did they choose this freely, or were they responding to Miquella's influence? The Loretta, who abandoned her allegiance to the Carians to guard his Halig tree, her own choice. The scores of followers who make pilgrimages toward his sanctuary despite the lethal journey. The DLC confirms this suspicion by showing Miquella deliberately breaking his own charm on his followers to test who would remain without it. Which means he knew it was there. He knew what he was doing to them. The kindest being in the Lands Between built his kingdom on a foundation of love that he manufactured. Marika and the murder of her son, the Black Knife assassins who carried out the Night of Black Knives, killing Godwyn and stealing a fragment of destined death to do so, are identified by item descriptions as Numen women with close ties to Marika. Marika is herself Numen. The Numen are described as a people who seldom reproduce and keep tightly to their own community. The probability that a group of Numen women operated a coordinated assassination of the firstborn demigod of the Lands Between without the knowledge or involvement of the goddess, who is also Numen, is extremely low. The implication, never stated directly but supported by every surrounding piece of evidence, is that Marika used her own people to kill her own son. Godwyn was beloved by everyone in the Lands Between, described as golden in temperament as well as appearance, a demigod who seemed to represent genuine goodness in a family not known for it, and his mother appears to have had him killed. The game never explains why, which makes the question echo louder the longer you hold it. Gideon's enabling of atrocity, Gideon Ovnir, the all-knowing, presents himself as a source of guidance and accumulated wisdom in the Round Table Hold. He is the closest thing to a mentor available to early game players, sharing information generously, appearing reasonable. And then his questline reveals him as something considerably darker. It was Gideon who dispatched people to massacre the Albinoric village in search of the Halig Tree medallion. He wanted information. The Albinorics had it. He sent in agents and they killed an entire community, rather than simply ask. Nefeli, his adopted daughter, witnesses the aftermath of this and is devastated. Gideon watches her devastation with the clinical interest of someone who regards emotional responses to atrocity as data points. He's not evil in the dramatic sense. He's evil in the mundane sense. A man who treats other people's lives as acceptable costs in the pursuit of knowledge, who has accumulated so much information that he has lost the capacity to understand why the methods of accumulation matter. The Round Table holds impossible geography. The Round Table Hold is presented as a sanctuary for Tarnished, a warm place by the fire, and it is. It is also somewhere that does not exist in any normal geographical sense. The Hold exists outside the regular flow of grace and space in the Lands Between, a fixed point between locations rather than within them. Melina can bring you there because she can navigate these liminal spaces. You cannot walk to it from the overworld. You arrive by grace and depart the same way. The Tarnished who gather there fear Rogier in his slow decline. Stay not necessarily because they cannot leave, but because leaving would mean returning to the world outside, which has its own particular horrors. What the game quietly establishes is that the warmth of the hold is real, and so is the fact that it exists nowhere. A sanctuary that sits in a gap between places, lit by a fire that has no geographic location, full of people who came seeking shelter and found that the shelter is technically outside reality. The fireside is genuine comfort. The comfort just happens to be floating in the space between destinations, and everyone sitting by it knows it. Melina's constructed purpose. Melina is confirmed by the game's own internal files, where she is named Marika of Daughter, and by the DLC's Messmer's kindling item, which describes Messmer's sister, who saw visions of the Erd Tree burning as Marika's secret daughter. She is never publicly acknowledged, never given a history, never permitted the context her siblings received. What she was given instead is a purpose. Guide the Tarnished and burn herself alive as the kindling that sets the Erd Tree alight. She accepts this. She does not rage against it. She frames her own immolation not as tragedy but as duty, approaching it with a calm that is more disturbing than grief would be. She walks beside you with genuine warmth, knowing her destination is the fire, asking nothing except that you let her be useful. The game never tells you why Marika chose this for her. Whether Melina herself understands the reasoning behind her own existence is never established. She has a mother inside the Erd Tree, and a purpose assigned before she could have chosen it. And the tragedy is not that she dies. It is that there was never a version of her that wasn't built around dying. D's righteous cruelty. D, Hunter of the Dead, is one of the first NPCs who seems unambiguously helpful. He warns you, guides you, equips you with useful knowledge about what you will face. His problem, which the game reveals slowly, is that his righteousness is indistinguishable from fanaticism. D hunts those who live in death, not because they pose an active threat to others, but because their existence violates the order he has consecrated his life to. When he encounters fear and understands her purpose, to birth a mending rune from Godwyn's corpse and create a world where those who live in death are legitimate, he kills her, not to stop an imminent harm, because her philosophy is unacceptable to him. He cannot conceive of a world in which the death-blighted dead deserve a place, and he will kill to prevent that world from being attempted. D represents the most dangerous kind of person the Golden Order produces. A true believer whose faith is sincere, whose cruelty is therefore also sincere, and who will never once question whether the order he serves deserved the loyalty he gave it. The Tarnished as weapons. There is a reading of Elden Ring's central premise that the game never contradicts and rarely acknowledges directly. You are not called back to the lands between to become Elden Lord. You were called back because Marika needed a weapon capable of dismantling the order she built. The Tarnished were exiled deliberately, stripped of grace deliberately, subjected to the hardship of living without divine favor deliberately. All of it a multi-generational program to produce warriors strong enough to challenge gods. The guidance of grace that you follow throughout the game, those golden beams pointing you towards sites of grace and legacy dungeons and shard bearers, is not divine instruction. It is a dead woman's pre-programmed instructions to her living projectile. Marika is gone. She is pinned to the Erd Tree, and you, the Tarnished she helped create, are walking her path on her behalf, toward an ending she designed before she ever shattered the ring, following a trajectory she set in motion long before you were born. Fear's draining embrace. Fear, the deathbed companion who invites you to rest against her in the Round Table hold, provides a genuine comfort. She is warm and soft-spoken and kind. She also takes something from you every time you accept her embrace. The Baldakin's blessing she gives you comes at the cost of reduced maximum HP. She drains a small amount of your vitality as part of the exchange, because her role as deathbed companion requires physical contact with the dying to absorb their essence. She needs what she takes. It is part of a sacred function, not malice. But you are not dying when you visit her. You are a Tarnished in relatively robust health. She drains you anyway, gently, with the same hand she uses to hold warriors as they die, collecting the small sparks of life force she needs to power the ritual that will eventually birth a new cosmic order from Godwyn's rotting flesh. The comfort is real, the cost is real. Both can be true at the same time, which is precisely what makes fear one of the game's most morally complicated figures. The finger reader's quiet deception. The finger readers, the blind women who translate the gestures of the two fingers into language for you, are performing an increasingly desperate act of improvisation. The two fingers have lost contact with the greater will. Multiple sources confirm this. The gestures are still being made, but without divine input, what the finger readers are translating is not instruction from a present god. It is ritual. It is the continuation of form after the content has departed. They know this, or they sense it, or they have chosen not to acknowledge it even to themselves. Their translations become more vague and philosophical as the game progresses, which can be read as spiritual deepening, or as people running out of specific things they know are true. The entire divine mandate you receive throughout Elden Ring, become Elden Lord, restore the Golden Order, fix what was broken, is being delivered by interpreters who are at best extrapolating from the last known instructions of an absent employer. At worst, they are making it up. Blaidd's broken loyalty. Blaidd the Half-Wolf is one of the most genuinely appealing characters in Elden Ring. Loyal, direct, honorable, in a world that has largely abandoned the concept. He is also not fully free. Blaidd is a shadow, a being created specifically to serve Ranni, and his devotion to her is woven into what he is at a fundamental level. When he begins to perceive that Ranni's plans conflict with the Two Fingers' will, that following her will mean breaking with the divine order his creation is tied to, he starts to destabilize. His mind cannot contain the contradiction. The shadow that was made to serve one thing is being asked to serve a different thing, and the gap between those two imperatives is too wide to sustain. By the end of Ranni's questline, he is found mad at the bottom of the Ranni's Rise area, attacking anything that approaches. He did not choose this madness. He cannot leave it. The only mercy the game offers him is that you are the one who delivers it, not a stranger. Goldmask, struck, speechless. Goldmask, the silent fundamentalist sorcerer who travels the lands between pursuing pure theological truth, discovers something at the end of his questline that the game refuses to let him articulate. Through the law of regression, a spell that strips illusion from reality, he and Brother Corin piece together the truth that Radagon is Marika, that the divine is internally divided, that the Golden Order is built on a foundation of gods at war with themselves. This is what Goldmask's life of scholarship has been directed toward. This is the flaw in the Golden Order he has been seeking. He knows it, he understands it, and he cannot speak. He communicates only through gestures. The T-pose he performs when you discover the truth together is the physical manifestation of a mind struck utterly still by a revelation. Someone who sought absolute truth their entire life and found it that it does not resolve into peace but into a kind of terrible clarity that has no language. He builds a mending rune from this knowledge. He creates the framework for a perfect order. And then he dies beside it, because the truth was what he needed, not the living. the Nox sealed underground. Long before the events of Elden Ring, the people of the Eternal City, the Nox, lived on the surface under the open night sky. They were devoted to the stars. They studied sorcery aligned with celestial forces. They worshipped a cosmic order that predated the Greater Will's dominance and did not submit to it. For this, the Greater Will buried them. The item descriptions of the Nox armor sets describe their banishment underground, cut off from the stars they revered, forced to live beneath a false night sky made of glowing stone and simulated starlight. The architecture of Nogkron and Nokstella, enormous, beautiful, clearly built by people who understood grandeur, exists entirely underground, lit by bioluminescence and artifice, because an outer god decided that a people who would not kneel deserved to be removed from the sky that gave their lives meaning. The false ceiling of Nokron, lit to look like stars, is both impressive engineering and the saddest thing in the game, a civilization rebuilding in miniature what was taken from them, painting starlight on the walls of their prison. Astel sent to erase a people. The punishment for the Nox did not stop at banishment. After they were sealed underground, the Greater Will sent a cosmic predator to finish the work. Astel, natural born of the Void, is a creature of overwhelming alien biology, a thing that arrived from beyond the stars and consumes. It was not a weapon that was fired and recalled. It was unleashed on the nameless Third Eternal City and destroyed it in a single night. The ruins of that city can be visited in deep-root depths. An entire urban civilization reduced to broken architecture, populated only by the echoes of what was once there, utterly leveled, while its sister cities survived, only because they were slightly further from the point of impact. Astel remains in the game, guarding Nokstella's deepest reaches, because no one ever called it back. It remains because its job is technically unfinished, or because the Greater Will simply lost interest in reclaiming it. A cosmic exterminator, still present in the cellar long after the infestation it was sent to address, growing stranger and more alien in the absence of purpose. The Albinoric torture frames. In Volcano Manor's prison town, the first-generation Albinorics you encounter are not the slow-moving, curious creatures you find in Liurnia. They are pinned upright in wooden torture frames, unable to move, stripped of the agency that characterized even their most vulnerable kin. Their faces, when they have faces, are blank with a specific kind of horror that the game encodes in their body language rather than dialogue. The ones who have been subjected to whatever was done in that dungeon have lost something beyond physical freedom. They lunge at you when freed from their frames, not because they recognize you as an enemy, but because everything that approaches them has been an enemy for however long they have been there. The Albinoric mask nearby tells you that someone took a face. The bloody racks tell you about the process. The frames tell you about the duration. Rykard's experiments on the Albinorics were not quick. They were systematic, conducted over time, producing results that were catalogued and built upon. This is what it means to be declared soulless. It means someone with power decided you don't require the protection extended to beings who have one. Omen, children's terrible birth. The Omen curse manifests as horns, and in the lands between, horns are primordial features, aspects of the crucible, the ancient melting pot of life from before the Erdtree refined existence into its current, more orderly form. This means that every Omen born is a body reasserting older, pre-Golden Order biology, a divine rebuke in flesh directed at the cosmological order Marika established. The Golden Order's response is confirmed directly by the Omen Bairn item. Omen babies have all their horns excised, and this excision causes most of them to perish. The memorial dolls, small fetishes in the likeness of a horned infant, are made specifically to remember them. Those born to common families die this way. Those born to royalty are treated somewhat differently. They are kept underground, hidden in the subterranean shunning grounds, their existence concealed from the world above. Morgoth and Mog survived because their mother was Marika herself, but their survival meant decades imprisoned beneath the city, bound in shame. The ordinary Omen baby has no such exception extended to it. Its horns are cut and it dies on a table, and someone makes a small doll to remember it by, because the world above has decided that the mercy of memory is sufficient replacement for the mercy of life. The Night Maidens left, without purpose. The black-robed, silver-masked women who attack you in Korea Manor and Raya Lucaria were not always hostile. They were sacred attendants to the Carrion royal family, guardians of the moon-worshipping tradition that predated the Academy's current curriculum. When Rennala collapsed, when heartbreak ate her authority and the Academy rebelled and sealed her in the library, the Night Maidens lost their direction. There was no one to serve. There was no moon liturgy being performed. There was no queen giving orders. And so they continued doing the only thing they knew, which was protecting the approaches to where Rennala was sealed, performing guard duty that had lost all meaning in service of a woman who was in no condition to acknowledge their continued existence. Their silver masks represent the full moon they once served. Their dark robes represent the night sky around it. They kept both long after the institution that gave those symbols meaning had dissolved, because the alternative was acknowledging that there was nothing left to guard. Their hostility is not malice. It is the last functional reflex of something that was once devotion. The nomadic merchants buried beneath the capital. In the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lendl, far below the palace and the golden towers and the evidence of the Golden Order's grandeur, there is a mass grave. The nomadic merchants, the peaceful figures you encounter throughout the game selling supplies, and sometimes, if you speak to them long enough, memories of a different life, were brought here and interred alive. Their crime was worshipping differently. The Golden Order declared their practices heretical and their entire people deserving of destruction. And rather than exile them or simply kill them quickly, they buried them here beneath the city, where the living capital above could go about its divine business without having to think about what was underneath. The suffering that accumulated in that place, the collective despair of an entire people entombed in darkness for the sin of different faith, was so intense that it attracted an outer god. The three fingers you encounter at the bottom of that pit, the entity of annihilation and return to oneness, is what answers when enough pain gathers in one place and cries out loudly enough. The frenzied flame is grief, compressed into cosmic force given purpose. The soulless doctrine and its permissions. The Golden Order's declaration that Albinorics lack souls is not a theological position arrived at through study. It is a permission structure. To declare a being soulless in the cosmology of the lands between is to place them outside the moral framework that protects everyone else. Soulless beings cannot return to the Erdtree because they have nothing to return. They are, in the Golden Order's accounting, equivalent to objects, useful, exploitable, disposable. This is the framework that allowed Gideon to massacre a village without theological concern. This is the framework that allowed Rykard to run experiments on Albinoric bodies in Prison Town. This is the framework that made the systematic hunting of artificial life acceptable to otherwise functional human beings. The game never has a character stand up and explicitly call this out as evil. It simply shows you the consequences and trusts you to arrive at the evaluation yourself. The soulless doctrine is the lands between's mechanism for making atrocity comfortable, and it works extremely well. Godfrey's deliberate exile. Wara Lu, who became Godfrey the first Elden Lord, was not simply dismissed when his usefulness expired. When his last worthy enemy fell, the grace drained from his eyes. Purpose and grace seem intertwined in the lands between, and when a warrior has nothing left to conquer, the Erdtree's blessing apparently withdraws. Marika then formally stripped him and his warriors of their grace and exiled them. But the words she spoke at that parting are striking. Grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my Lord, Lord Godfrey. She told them to return. She told them that after their deaths, she would give back what she had claimed. What this strongly implies, though the game stops short of stating it plainly, is that the exile was not punishment, but design. The hardship the Tarnished endured outside the lands between, dying and fighting in foreign lands across generations, could be read as a deliberate tempering process, creating warriors capable of something the grace-comfortable inhabitants of the lands between could never become. Whether this was truly Marika's calculated plan from the beginning, or whether she improvised the justification after the fact, is something the law withholds. What is clear is that she exiled her husband, watched his lineage grow fierce and numerous through suffering, and then called them back specifically to act on her behalf. The result of that arrangement is you. The misbegotten as ignored intelligence. The misbegotten. The Leonine. Sometimes winged creatures that serve as enemies throughout the early game and as slaves in Volcano Manor, are dismissed by the Golden Order as beasts. Feral creatures whose crucible-touched origins mark them as outside the framework of civilized beings. This is a lie visible in the game's own assets. The misbegotten have complex social structures. They demonstrate grief. When one dies, others react. They have aesthetic preferences. The misbegotten warrior in Volcano Manor wields a weapon with evident skill. And most damningly, Hugh, the mastersmith who created weapons capable of harming gods, is a misbegotten. A being the Golden Order classifies as subhuman, has produced the most sophisticated metallurgical work in the lands between's history. The Order that enslaved his people looked at the evidence of his intelligence, his artisanship, his mastery of divine materials, and saw a beast they were fortunate to have captured. The relationship between what the misbegotten actually are and what the Golden Order declared them to be is a gap wide enough to drive an entire civilization's guilt through. Hugh's centuries of imprisonment. The blacksmith in the Round Table Hold is not simply working under difficult conditions. He has been imprisoned for what his dialogue implies are centuries, tasked by Marika herself with a mission that cannot be completed. Forging a weapon capable of slaying a god, in a world where destined death has been sealed away and gods are effectively unkillable. Marika gave him purpose. She also gave him a task with no endpoint, which means his imprisonment has no endpoint. He is afraid of her, genuinely, viscerally afraid, in a way that suggests his history with her involves things he will not describe. He is a misbegotten, a being his captors consider subhuman, kept alive because he is useful, because his hands know things other hands do not. He has spent an unknown number of decades or centuries alone at an anvil, in a building that exists outside normal space, working on a weapon that may not be possible to create, for a woman who may already be dead, serving a purpose he did not choose. And when Roderica arrives, he becomes gentle. He finds warmth he had probably forgotten he was capable of. The round table hold burns eventually, and he stays at the forge, because finishing what he started is the only remaining version of himself he knows. The tarnished mass graves, across the landscape of the lands between. If you look carefully at the fields and roads between major landmarks, you will find bodies, not enemies, not monsters, tarnished. Warriors called back to the lands between by grace, guided by golden beams, told they were chosen, and killed. They lie where they fell. No one moved them, no one buried them. The grace that called them back and guided them forward simply stopped when they stopped, and the world moved on. You are not the first tarnished to be called. You will see the evidence of dozens, possibly hundreds, who answered the same call and ended up as roadside decoration. Their ambitions and their sufferings and whatever they believed about their purpose, reduced to a body lying in the grass that you step over on the way to becoming something they failed to be. The tarnished are chosen, and the lands between is littered with the evidence of how selective that choosing gets. The frenzied flame's logical terror. There is something uniquely unsettling about the frenzied flame compared to every other threat in Elden Ring, and it is not its power. It is the coherence of its philosophy. The Three Fingers and their yellow-eyed adherents are not driven by rage or cruelty or ambition. They are driven by a conclusion. Their argument, stripped to its bones, is this: the separation of the one great into individual beings was a catastrophic mistake. Every act of suffering in the lands between, every war between demigods, every soul trapped in a broken rebirth cycle, every person cursed and tormented and abandoned by their gods, is a consequence of that original division. Return everything to undivided oneness, burn the distinctions away, and there can be no more suffering, because there will be no separate selves left to suffer. Shabriri, the most reviled man in the lands between's history, spread this philosophy not through violence but through words. He whispered it into people and let them carry it forward. Hyetta follows it to her own immolation, with genuine peace on her face. The horror of the frenzied flame is not that its believers are wrong about everything. It is that their diagnosis of the problem is difficult to entirely dismiss, and their solution is the end of everyone you have ever cared about. The Three Fingers beneath Lindell. To reach the Three Fingers, the manifestation of the frenzied flame beneath Lindell, you must find a hidden path in the subterranean shunning grounds. Descend through a gauntlet of horrors, strip off every piece of equipment and armor you are wearing, and fall naked into a pit. The game requires this. It will not let you proceed while clothed. The designers understood something about what this encounter represents. To accept the embrace of the frenzied flame, you must arrive at it with nothing. No protection, no identity built from accumulated gear, nothing between your skin and the darkness. The Three Fingers that wait at the bottom of that fall do not speak. They simply open, enormous and many-jointed, and brand you. And from that moment forward, unless you take specific, difficult steps to undo it, every ending is locked. You carry the mark. You carry the fire. The design of the encounter communicates the philosophy more effectively than any dialogue could. The path to annihilation requires you to first become nothing, so that annihilation feels like a logical continuation of something you already chose. Outer god possession is irreversible. Melina, Blaidd of Miquella, was born with the scarlet rot inside her. It was not contracted. It was not a curse applied to her from outside. The outer god of rot was present in her body from the moment of her birth, a divine passenger that her Empyrean nature attracted and could never fully expel. Miquella's unalloyed gold needles were designed to suppress this presence, to create pockets of immunity in her flesh, where the rot god's influence could not reach. They worked partially, some of the time, but the god did not leave. It waited. When Melina bloomed in her battle with Radan, she did not choose to release the rot. The god inside her chose, and she could not prevent it. The goddess of scarlet rot that you fight in the Halig tree is not Melina at her most powerful. It is Melina at her most displaced. A person who has been slowly replaced, aspect by aspect, until the rot has more surface area inside her than she does. She is still in there. She narrates her own transformation with awareness of what it means. She cannot stop it. An outer god does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It colonizes, and it calls that colonization divinity. The tree burning was always coming. There are item descriptions in Elden Ring that suggest Marika did not simply snap under the weight of grief when she shattered the ring. She planned. The guidance of grace that she pre-programmed into the world, pointing Tarnished towards sites of grace and major landmarks, was set up before the shattering, indicating she arranged her own act of destruction with deliberate forethought. She knew what the tree was. She knew it was a feeding apparatus for the greater will, harvesting souls, preventing true death, keeping the world in a permanent state of harvested rebirth. She built it, she presided over it, and at some point, she decided it had to end, and began building the mechanism for its ending decades or centuries before she made the move. The Golden Order's most devout faithful, those sealed inside the tree who burn with it, are not collateral damage from an impulsive act. They are, from a sufficiently cold perspective, the price of a plan that was always going to require paying. Marika is not a woman who broke. She is a woman who waited and planned and finally acted. That is considerably more frightening. The Elden Ring cannot be fixed. Every ending in Elden Ring involves choosing a mending rune or an equivalent action to repair the shattered ring. Every single one. And not one of them actually heals what was broken. Goldmask's perfect order removes divine influence from the world's laws, which sounds clean until you consider what fills that vacuum. Fear's mending. Rune of Death and Order grants the dead a place in existence, but it also legitimizes those who live in death, which has its own implications for the living. The Dung Eater's fell curse curses every soul born henceforward with the Omen mark. The Age of Stars removes divine oversight entirely. The frenzied flame erases everything. The game's writers designed a situation where every available solution introduces a different problem, where the act of repair is itself a form of damage, because the thing being repaired was always already compromised at the foundation. You do not become Elden Lord by fixing the world. You become Elden Lord by choosing which version of broken the world will be going forward, and hoping it is the one most people can survive. The dark endpoint of fundamentalism. Brother Corin begins his questline as a passionate, slightly pompous Golden Order fundamentalist who is genuinely excited to be doing theology in the field. He studies, he questions, he follows Goldmask, who doesn't speak, toward a truth he believes will vindicate everything he has dedicated himself to. And when they find it, when the law of regression reveals that Radagon is Marika, that the divine is internally divided, that the foundations of the Golden Order are built on a being at war with itself, Corin cannot bear it. He dies near Goldmask's corpse, broken by the knowledge that the perfect order he sought was never perfect at all. What neither of them fully reckons with is the darker implication that Goldmask's mending rune gestures toward. An order so refined it removes divine fickleness from its laws entirely. an order so perfect it no longer requires gods. Take that thought one step further. An order so purely mathematical, so completely stripped of the messy will of conscious beings, so perfectly logical. Does it require people at all? The fundamentalist endpoint, pursued far enough, is a universe of perfect, empty law. The most devoted believers in order are always one conclusion away from advocating for a world in which belief itself is an impurity. The Elden Beast's long residency. The final boss of Elden Ring is not Marika. It is what lives inside Marika. The Elden Beast is the physical manifestation of the Elden Ring itself, a vast and ancient entity of the greater will that was placed inside a mortal vessel to anchor divine order to the lands between. It is enormous in its true form, a creature of golden constellation patterns and impossible scale, something that came from beyond and has been coiled inside a human body for the entire span of recorded history in this world. Marika has never been alone, not for a single moment of her divine existence. The god the world worshipped was always partially something else, wearing her as a garment. Her rebellion, her shattering of the ring, was not just political resistance. It was an act performed by a woman trying to evict a tenant from her own body, who had been there so long that most people had forgotten they were two separate things. When you fight the Elden Beast in the game's final confrontation, you are fighting the thing that made Marika's life what it was. And winning doesn't free her. She's been gone too long for freedom to mean anything anymore. Ranni's unknowable gift, the Age of Stars ending, widely considered the most hopeful conclusion available in Elden Ring, removes all divine oversight from the lands between. Ranni places a tiny ring on your finger, disappears into the cosmos, and the stars begin their long journey away from the world, taking the Erdtree's light with them. Mortals are left to find their own way. This sounds on the surface like liberation. Humanity finally freed from the governance of cosmic predators and their bureaucratic intermediaries. And it may be, the game will not tell you. What the Age of Stars actually promises is not a good world, but an unknown one. A world where the mechanisms of soul recycling and divine guidance and cosmic oversight have simply been withdrawn, leaving beings who have been dependent on those systems for their entire recorded history to figure out existence without them. Whether this is the kindest ending or the cruelest depends entirely on what you believe humanity is capable of when no one is watching. Ranni doesn't stay to find out. She leaves you there, alone, to determine the answer in her absence. Death stolen from every soul. There is a detail about the lands between that becomes more disturbing the longer you hold it. The people who live there cannot die. Not truly, not finally. The Erdtree's rebirth cycle takes every soul that departs a body and processes it back into the world, imperfectly restored, arriving again into existence whether it wants to or not. Those who live in death, the skeletal undead you fight in catacombs and fields, are not aberrations. They are what happens when the rebirth system processes someone who arrived at death having already spent everything they had, who has nothing left to give the cycle, who comes back wrong because there was not enough coherent personhood remaining to make a proper return. The horror is not that they exist. The horror is that the alternative, true death, the right to finish, was sealed away by Marika to feed the Erdtree, and no one who died after that point ever consented to the arrangement. Every soul recycled through the Golden Tree is a soul that was not asked. The lands between is a world where even death is something that happens to you, not something you are permitted to choose. Marika's calculated destruction, The moment Marika shatters the Elden Ring is presented in the game's opening as a catastrophe, the inciting event of everything that follows. What takes most players a full playthrough to fully appreciate is that it was not a breakdown. The Elden Ring's item descriptions, Marika's own scattered in-world messages, and the design of the guidance system that she pre-programmed into Grace. All of it points to a woman who decided, deliberately, to destroy the instrument of the Greater Will's control over the world she inhabited. She had built the Golden Order. She had served as its vessel for an indeterminate span of time, measured not in years, but in geological eras. She had watched her children fracture and war and die and be recycled. And then she picked up the ring and broke it, knowing exactly what would come next. Chaos, war, the shattering. The return of the Tarnished she had spent generations preparing. She did not snap. She executed. The lands between, as you experience it, shattered, broken, beautiful, terrible, is the world Marika chose to leave behind. Every ruined castle and rotting demigod and mass grave beneath the capital is part of the aftermath of one woman's decision to burn her own work to the ground rather than let it continue. The Dung Eater's true victims. The loathsome Dung Eater is introduced in the Round Table Hold as a red phantom in a corpse-strewn room, and the game makes clear almost immediately that he is a serial killer of the worst possible kind. What the game communicates with more restraint than it might have is the nature of what he does to his victims. The seedbed curses you find scattered across the lands between are the physical evidence. Small, horrible growths that sprout from the bodies of people he has killed and violated, preventing their souls from returning to the Erdtree and leaving them in a state of eternal, cursed suspension. Big Boggart, who witnesses one of these acts, cannot describe it. He can only say it is the vilest and most disgusting thing he has ever seen. The specific physical mechanics of the seedbed curse, what the defilement involves, why it leaves evidence where it does. The game leaves to implication, and the implication is worse than any explicit description. What the Dung Eater is doing is not simply killing. He is performing a ritual violation that he has elevated to a cosmological act, a way of defiling the Golden Order's rebirth system one soul at a time, working toward the day when enough accumulated curses can be fashioned into a mending rune that will make his entire philosophy permanent. The Dung Eater was hanged and came back. There is a detail in the Dung Eater's lore that most players encounter and move past without fully registering its implications. He was publicly executed, hanged in front of a crowd as punishment for his crimes. He died, and then the grace of the Greater Will brought him back, because he is tarnished, and tarnished are called to return. The people of the lands between who gathered to watch justice administered, watched him swing, and presumably went home believing it was done. It was not done. He came back, and he was exactly the same person who was hanged, and he returned to his work. The tarnished grace that you rely on to survive death in the game. The same mechanic that lets you try again after every failure. Is the same grace that gave a man who violated and cursed the souls of his victims immortality. The Greater Will's return mechanism does not evaluate the worthiness of who it resurrects. It simply brings Tarnished back. There is no moral filter on the miracle of return, which means the miracle is available to everyone, including the ones who most deserve to stay dead. Boggart's End. Blackguard. Big Boggart is not a significant figure in Elden Ring's lore in the grand cosmological sense. He is a poacher who sells prawns from the outer moat of Leyndell, and if you talk to him enough times and progress his questline, He begins to feel like one of the few genuinely decent people in the game. He has straightforward pleasures. He appreciates good food. He's the kind of person who exists in a war-torn world of demigods and outer gods and is simply trying to run a small business and enjoy his evenings. When the Dung Eater is released from his cell, the first thing he does is find Boggart. He does not find him because Boggart wronged him. He finds him because you befriended Boggart, and the Dung Eater tracked you to him the way a predator tracks prey through a trail it recognizes. Boggart's death is not dramatic. You find him at the moat, his throat cut, dying. He has a few last words about the prawns. He doesn't understand why it happened. He never did anything to deserve it. In a game full of deaths that mean something cosmologically, Boggart's death means something humanly, which is almost harder to sit with. The faces inside Rykard. When you fight Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, in his serpent form, the arena is described in lore as filled with piles of corpses and tall corpse pillars, the physical remains of every champion who accepted Tanith's invitation and was devoured. Rykard believed that by eating people, their bodies and souls would join his family, that each consumed warrior extended his life and power. His voice during the fight is warm and inviting, encouraging you to join the feast, framing predation as communion. The corpse pillars surrounding you are the evidence of everyone who accepted that invitation before you. Based on his dialogue and the Rykard's Rancor spell, which describes the spirits of his devoured followers crying out, what remains of those consumed champions isn't entirely gone. Their spiritual essence lingers as residual rancor, a collective tortured presence trapped within the serpentine mass that devoured them. Whether they retain anything resembling consciousness or experience is something the game leaves open. What is clear is that the arena you fight in is a monument to appetite. A man who sought to destroy the gods by becoming something that could eat them, and who built that transformation on the literal substance of the people who followed him there. Tanith's guard at the end. After Rykard's defeat, you can find Tanith in his ruined chamber, kneeling over what remains of him, eating. Her knight, the armored figure who served as her bodyguard throughout your interactions with Volcano Manor, stands near her and will attack you if you approach. He is defending her. He is standing guard over an act of devotional cannibalism in a chamber that smells of sulfur and serpent, making sure no one interrupts the woman he serves in the most intimate and private grief she will ever have. There is something about this detail, the normalcy of a loyal retainer doing his job in the most abnormal possible circumstances, that captures something essential about how Volcano Manor functions. Everyone there has decided that their lord's choices are beyond evaluation, that devotion means acceptance of whatever those choices become, that service does not end when the thing being served becomes monstrous. The knight at the door is not guarding a monster. He is guarding his lady in her grief. The distinction matters to him. It matters less to the act. Diallo's and the servant. He couldn't save. Diallo's Hoslo carries the guilt of a man who believes he failed someone who depended on him, and the game follows him across the entire map to make sure you understand the weight of it. He is looking for Liurnia, his servant, who was kidnapped and taken to Volcano Manor as a recruit or a subject. He follows rumors. He asks questions. He pursues her with the kind of determination that speaks more to guilt than heroism, because you sense he knows, on some level, that finding her alive is unlikely, and that the search is partially penance. When you find Liurnia in Volcano Manor, she is dead. When Diallo's finds her, you watch him receive that knowledge, and it rearranges him in ways his dialogue captures without stating outright. He travels afterward to Jarberg, the peaceful Jar village, and helps protect the Jars there. Small, helpless creatures he cannot let be hurt the way Liurnia was hurt, because the only response he has left to his failure is to be present for the next group of vulnerable things that need someone. He dies in Jarberg defending them. He never forgave himself. He died trying to be the person he thought he should have been. Bock and the absence of true choice. The game presents Bock the Seamster's storyline as a question about self-acceptance, and then quietly ensures the question has no good answer. Bock is a demi-human who is abandoned by his own people, survives by his skill as a tailor, and hates his own appearance with a fervour that speaks to years of accumulated rejection. You can help him through his questline and eventually offer him two options. Use a larval tear so he can be reborn into a human form through Rennala, or use the prattling pat that whispers you are beautiful near him, granting him a kind of peace with himself. If you give him the larval tear, he is reborn human, emerges beautiful, loses the ability to speak, and dies shortly after, because demi-humans cannot survive Rennala's rebirth process. If you use the prattling pate, his self-acceptance is, per the item's description, potentially the product of a slight magical compulsion rather than genuine internal transformation. The game does not offer an option where Bock simply arrives at peace with who he is through natural means, because the world he inhabits does not contain that option. Some places are so thoroughly hostile to certain kinds of people that self-love becomes genuinely impossible to access without either dying or being enchanted into it. The cruelest thing about Millicent. Millicent's questline is one of Elden Ring's most complete character arcs, and its end is one of the most quietly devastating. She is an offshoot of Melina, not her daughter, but a fragment of her divine essence that took independent form after one of the scarlet rot blooms, inheriting both the affliction and, it seems, something of Melinia's stubborn will to resist it. She spends her questline fighting the rot within her, making choices that parallel her source's own struggle, but in the opposite direction. Melina surrendered herself to the rot, eventually becoming the goddess of rot. Millicent refuses. She removes Melinia's needle. She chooses humanity over divine power, chooses to be a person rather than an aspect of a god. And then she blooms. A scarlet Aeonia flower grows from her body. She dies from a choice she made with clear eyes and full understanding. And the flower that marks her death is the exact same flower that marks every place Melina herself has surrendered to the rot. Her humanity is confirmed by its ending, and that ending looks identical to the divine capitulation she spent her entire arc refusing. The distinction between her death and Melinia's transformation is enormous, and is visible to almost no one who observes either from the outside. Jarberg's cheerful cannibalism. Jarberg is one of the most intentionally charming locations in Elden Ring. A peaceful settlement of living jars, small and large, going about their simple existence in a little valley beneath the cliffs of Liurnia. Jarbairn, the small jar child who acts as your introduction to the village, is delightful. He has opinions. He tells you about the villagers. He is hoping to become a warrior jar someday. And then, if you think about what the living jars actually are, vessels filled with the remains of warriors, animated by the combined essence of the dead they contain, Jarberg becomes something slightly different. Every jar going about its quiet village business is a walking collection of corpses. The cheerful potentate aspirant is a child's voice coming from a clay vessel packed with dead people. Alexander, the most beloved warrior jar in the game, was found in Caelid, filling himself with fresh battlefield dead after the Radahn fight because his jar needed replenishment, and the festival had provided excellent material. This information is delivered in the same warm, good-natured tone Alexander uses for everything, which is precisely why it lands the way it does. The horror is not incidental to the charm. The charm is load-bearing. Alexander at the end of the world. The journey of Iron Fist. Alexander takes him from Khalid, where you find him stuck in the ground, to the summit of Farum Azula, the crumbling time-locked city outside normal reality. He consumes warriors along the way. He absorbs their remains, their essence, their accumulated strength. He does this not out of cruelty, but out of devotion. He wants to be worthy. He wants to be strong enough to be worthy of being consumed by someone even stronger, to pass the accumulated essence he carries into a vessel greater than himself, to be the gift rather than the recipient. When you finally face him in a duel at Farum Azula, it is because he is ready. He has decided that you are the worthy warrior he has been searching for, and he wants you to open him. His final moments carry a satisfaction that is sincere and complete, and it does not change what the satisfaction is about. A being who measured the worth of his entire existence by whether someone stronger than him wanted to eat him. He got what he wanted. The Jar village would be proud. This is a good death by his culture's standards, and his culture's standards are built entirely on the premise that the best thing a person can become is useful raw material for someone else's transcendence. Latenna, after the wolf. Latenna is one of the few first-generation Albinorics who can still speak and think and make choices, and you find her in a cave, immobile, beside a dead wolf. She cannot walk. First-generation Albinorics lose their legs as they age. The degenerative condition built into their artificial origin slowly claiming their mobility. The wolf carried her. The wolf is dead. She will never walk again. She cannot pursue her mission. Reaching the apostate derelict at the edge of the consecrated snowfield, without someone who can carry her, she asks you to be that someone. And if you agree, she rides your summon sign across the entire latter half of the game, a passenger in her own quest, entirely dependent on the willingness of a stranger to care about the destination she has been unable to reach alone. When she finally arrives at the apostate derelict, she completes her purpose and disappears into the ritual she traveled so far to perform. But the journey, the helplessness of it, the way her intelligence and courage and determination were insufficient without functional legs, the way the world had arranged itself so that she required rescue to matter, is its own quiet horror. She is one of the most capable people in the game. She needed you to carry her there, or it meant nothing. Raya's terrible inheritance. Raya, who you meet as a scout for Volcano Manor, and who gives you an invitation that leads you deeper into that sinister household, has a secret she does not know for most of her questline. She is Zoraya's, daughter of Rykard, born of a serpent god's bloodline. When she discovers this, when the full weight of her heritage becomes legible to her, when she understands what her father is and what that makes her, the game gives you a choice. You can speak to her, you can comfort her, or you can give her a tonic that will let her remain in human form, not knowing what she is, effectively choosing permanent ignorance over the knowledge that is destroying her. The most genuinely compassionate option the game offers is helping someone never have to be who they actually are. And if you don't give her the tonic, she disappears. She cannot be found. The implication is that she went somewhere private to become whatever Rykard's blood requires her to become, away from anyone who knew her when she was still someone she recognized. There is no ending for Raya that doesn't involve loss. The only question is which loss she carries forward. The living jar's consciousness. Question. Alexander answers questions with warmth and simplicity. He has preferences. He has goals. He has something that functions as pride when he grows stronger, and something that functions as disappointment when he does not. The smaller jars in Jarberg have individual personalities, distinct from one another, recognizable after multiple conversations. The question none of them can answer, because none of them have the framework to ask it, is whether the consciousness animating them belongs to the jar or to the remains inside it. When you fill a jar with the bodies of warriors, do you create a new being, or do you create a committee of old ones? Is Alexander's warmth his own, or is it an average of the personalities of everyone he has ever consumed, smoothed into something coherent by the clay that holds them? The Jarite Dialos encounters in Jarberg buries fallen jars with ceremony, and the remaining jars mourn. They have something. What they have is unclear enough to be disturbing precisely because it is unclear. The game never resolves it. Alexander goes into that final duel with absolute certainty about who he is and what he wants, and it is possible he is the first one of his kind to ever have that certainty, and it is also possible he is entirely wrong about its basis. Liurnia, slowly swallowing itself. Walk through Liurnia with the knowledge of what sits beneath it, and the region transforms. The beautiful shallow lakes, the crumbling spires emerging from the water, the settlements that seem to have simply decided to continue existing at a slight tilt. All of it reads differently when you understand that the lake of rot lies directly below. The outer god of scarlet rot was sealed underground, and its containment is imperfect. The rot seeps upward. It does not rush. It does not announce itself. It simply dissolves slowly, consistently, the geological material that Liurnia's surface rests upon, so that the entire region is in a state of gradual quiet subsidence. The people who still live in Liurnia, the few who remain after the Academy's collapse and the shattering war, are living on ground that is imperceptibly but continuously failing beneath them. They do not know. The infrastructure of the Golden Order that might have addressed the problem has collapsed. The region's future, absent some cosmological intervention that the game does not provide, is the lake. Everything above it will eventually join everything below it, and no one alive there now will still be alive when that process completes. The Shunning Grounds Hidden Archive. The subterranean shunning grounds beneath Leyndell are described simply as a sewer, and functionally they serve as such, a place beneath the city where unwanted things are disposed of. But the range of what the city considers unwanted, readable from the enemies and items you find there, constitutes an unofficial archive of every sin the Golden Order preferred not to acknowledge publicly. The Omen, who were not killed at birth, but were not suitable for Godrick's grafting projects, are down there. The merchant's mass grave is down there. The Three Fingers are down there. The path to the frenzied flame, the outer god of ending, runs directly through the Golden Order's literal waste system, passing through everything the city above chose to pretend was not happening. The design is deliberate. The game places the path to annihilation through a tour of the evidence for why someone might want annihilation. The frenzied flame doesn't offer its philosophy in the abstract. It shows you the receipts first, and then it offers. Caelid was once alive. Caelid, as you experience it, is one of the most comprehensively ruined regions in any game. Scarlet skies, rotted forests, creatures warped beyond recognition by the scarlet rot, entire military formations still engaged in a war that ended decisively and left no survivors capable of registering their own defeat. The detail that makes this genuinely disturbing rather than simply bleak is the time frame. Millennia and Radahn fought in Caelid. Millennia bloomed. The rot spread. This is a recent event in the lore's timeline, not an ancient catastrophe lost to prehistory. There are beings alive in the lands between who remember when Caelid was green. Gowry, the sorcerer you meet there, practices his craft in a building that was clearly once a normal dwelling. The Radahn festival you attend, where warriors gather to fight the rot-mad demigod on his home field, is an ongoing event, not a historical commemoration. What Caelid looks like right now is what one battle between two people did to an entire region within a span of time that living witnesses can testify to. The Scarlet Rot does not wait. The Stormveil Bodies. Stormveil Castle is the first major legacy dungeon most players explore, and it sets a tone that is easy to absorb as atmosphere and move past. The bodies hanging from the ramparts, the corpses impaled on stakes in the courtyards, the soldiers who have been displayed in positions of defeat rather than simply left where they fell. These are not set dressing. Godrick the Grafted, who rules Stormveil, is a man consumed by paranoia about his own inadequacy. He is the weakest of the demigods, and he knows it, and everyone around him knows it, and his response to knowing it is to make the evidence of his power as visible as possible at all times. The bodies on Stormveil's walls are not the casualties of a battle. They are a communication to approaching travelers, to his own soldiers, to himself. He arranges them. He has them displayed. The castle is, among other things, an ongoing gallery of consequences, updated regularly, curated by a man so frightened of being perceived as small that he builds monuments to his cruelty to prove he is large. Castle Saul's eternal drill. In the remote, frozen heights of the mountaintops of the giants, Castle Saul sits surrounded by wind and ice, its interior haunted by the ghosts of soldiers who have been here far longer than the castle's stones have been standing. The men you encounter as spectres are still drilling, still moving through formation exercises, still practicing the military discipline that defined their lives, still going through the motions of an assignment that has been incomplete for what the lore suggests has been centuries. They were here for the eclipse ritual, the ceremony intended to give Godwyn a true death in soul, to complete the death that only took his body on the night of Black Knives. The ritual failed. The eclipse didn't come, and the soldiers who had gathered to make it happen simply stayed, because their orders were to be here until the ritual was completed, and the ritual was never completed. They became ghosts while still following orders. They have been following those orders ever since. The castle is full of men whose loyalty outlasted their lives, drilling endlessly in a failed ceremony, waiting for a completion that will never come, because the ghost of a command is still a command. The bloodstain that tells everything. In the depths of Stormveil Castle, near a root mass infested with death blight and guarded by an ulcerated tree spirit, there is a bloodstain on the floor. Bloodstains in Elden Ring show you the last moments of other players, a mechanic that, in this location, becomes something specific and narratively relevant. This bloodstain shows someone being grabbed and pulled upward. The exact animation that plays when a character is killed by the deathblight creature roosting among the roots nearby. Rogier, the sorcerer you meet on your way through Stormveil, and who later appears dying slowly in the Round Table Hold, came here before you. He found the root. He touched Godwyn's face growing on it, and he received the death blight that is slowly killing him. The bloodstain is, in all likelihood, Rogier's last moment in that location. You can stand where it happened and know what happened before a word of his dialogue in the hold explains it. The game gives you the evidence before it gives you the context, trusting you to hold both together. Rogier did not stumble into danger. He walked toward it deliberately, seeking understanding, and the thing he sought to understand killed him for the trespass. The Erdtree's hidden root system descend far enough beneath the surface of the lands between, through the shunning grounds, through deep-root depths, far beyond what the golden light above suggests is possible. And you find the Erdtree's roots, not the small ornamental versions visible near its base. The actual roots, enormous and golden and unmistakably purposeful, wrapped around and actively drawing from another far older tree. The Great Tree, the ancient plant from which the Erdtree grew as a parasite, or perhaps as a replacement, or perhaps as an infestation that the original tree had no power to prevent. Items made from the Great Tree's material, root resin, certain crafting goods, come specifically from the older tree's roots, not from the Erdtree, because the Erdtree's roots are busy doing something else. They are feeding. The beauty visible from the surface, the golden light that graces the lands between, the warmth that radiates from the tree that every faith in the world has organized itself around. It is produced by something extracting what it needs from something older and quieter and unable to object. The Erdtree's radiance comes from below, from what it takes. That's been true since before anyone alive was born. Nokron's painted heaven. The ceiling of Nokron, the eternal city, glows with what appears to be a star-filled night sky. It is not. It is a crafted simulation of a night sky, built by people who were exiled from the actual sky and could not bear to live without the appearance of what was taken from them. The Nox, who worshipped the stars and organized their civilization and their sorcery around celestial observation, were banished underground and cut off from the cosmos they revered, and so they built a false cosmos on the ceiling of their prison, lit it to look like the stars they lost, and continued their devotions beneath it. There is something about this, the determination to keep worshipping the thing that has been taken from you, even when what you worship has been replaced by a painting of it, that is both moving and heartbreaking in a way that is difficult to fully articulate. The stars above Nokron are not stars. They never were. The city below them has been practicing faith in an illusion for as long as anyone can remember, and the practice is so complete that it is functionally indistinguishable from the real thing to everyone who lives within it. The catacombs cannot hold the dead. The catacombs scattered across the lands between are not simply atmosphere. They are infrastructure, the physical system through which the Erdtree's rebirth cycle processes the dead. Bodies are interred there, their souls eventually absorbed into the golden tree for recycling back into the world. This system is failing. The catacombs you explore are overcrowded with the restless dead, with skeleton warriors who should have passed through and didn't, with imps and spirits and beings that got stuck somewhere in the process. The reason is Godwyn. His corpse in deep-root depths, spreading through the root system as the Prince of Death, has contaminated the infrastructure of rebirth. The death root grows where the tree's roots reach, and where the death root grows, the dead stop processing properly. They accumulate. They fill the spaces designed to hold them temporarily and cannot move on. Every catacomb in the game that is stuffed with hostile undead is a catacomb that has been compromised by a dead god spreading contamination. A place where the machinery of the afterlife has been clogged by the consequences of one night's assassination decades or centuries ago. The processions that never end, The wandering mausoleums are confirmed in lore to be the resting places of soulless demigods. Marika's unwanted children, beings whose souls were denied or destroyed, and who cannot return to the Erdtree because they have nothing left to return. The bells hanging from their undersides ring constantly to mourn these incomplete dead. What makes their wandering so specifically bleak is the absence of purpose behind the movement. There is no destination. The fandom wiki describes them simply as structures that wander around set areas. They are not walking toward anything. They follow no path that ends in rest. The soulless demigods inside cannot complete the cycle of death and return that would grant them rest, so the mausoleums simply continue, moving, ringing, refusing to stop, because stopping would mean the burial is finished, and a burial cannot finish for someone who cannot properly die. Every bell toll is a funeral note for a ceremony that has no conclusion. Every step is a procession without a destination. The most haunting thing about them is not their scale, but their patience. They have been walking since before you arrived, and will still be walking after you're gone. Mourning beings that cannot receive the mourning, and carrying remains that cannot be interred. What Limgrave's crosses mean? If you pay attention to the crosses that appear throughout Limgrave and other early areas, some bearing bound figures, some empty, all rendered in the same style that appears on summoning pool icons and on Marika's personal iconography. You are looking at a symbol that has a specific referent. Marika is crucified, pinned to the Erdtree by the greater will as punishment and containment, her body held in a position that became so associated with her that it spread throughout her realm as her emblem. The crosses in Limgrave are not decorative. They are not simply the aesthetic vocabulary of a medieval world. They are replicas, conscious or unconscious, of the image of the goddess at the center of the Golden Order's faith, pinned and helpless, displayed as a warning or a monument or both. Every cross with a screaming figure bound to it is a small local reenactment of what the divine looks like up close, not enthroned, not radiant, not dispensing grace from above, trapped in pain, unable to leave. The Golden Order's emblem is a prisoner's silhouette. Its followers built that emblem into the landscape for reasons they may not have fully understood. Miquella shed his innocence. Deliberately, the Miquella of the base game is a background presence, known primarily through what others say about him. Compassionate, gifted, the best of Marika's children, a being of genuine kindness. The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC recontextualizes all of this by showing you what Miquella chose to become in order to pursue godhood. He abandoned his physical form in the cocoon at Mog's palace, leaving behind not just his body, but the eternal youth that had trapped him in a child's frame his entire life. He emerged in the realm of shadow as something older, something more deliberate, something considerably harder to simply love. The first thing he did with his new authority was deliberately break the charm that had been compelling his followers' devotion, watching what remained of their loyalty when it was no longer engineered. He tested them. He used the people who had given up everything to follow him as tools for determining which tools would remain useful. The child who inspired such devotion that knights chose to rot alive rather than leave his sister chose, at the first moment of real power, to behave exactly like every other god in the lands between. Miquella's charm shattered on purpose. The followers who accompanied Miquella into the realm of shadow, Needle Knight Leda, Freya, the Hornsent, Sir Ansbach, were all there because they believed in him. They had given up previous lives, previous loyalties, previous selves. And Miquella broke his hold on them intentionally, releasing them from the charm that had been shaping their devotion, watching to see what happened to people when the thing that had made them certain was removed. What happened was fragmentation. Some remained committed, some turned hostile, some turned on each other. Later, his most loyal follower becomes one of the most likely forces to try to stop you near the end of the DLC, because without the charm binding her to a simplified understanding of devotion, she has to reckon with what her loyalty actually means when the object of it turns out to be willing to use people without informing them of the cost. She was loyal. She was used. These two facts do not cancel each other out, and they do not harmonize. And without Miquella's influence smoothing the contradiction flat, she has nowhere to put it except outward. Mesmer, erased from history. Somewhere in Marika's history, there is a child who does not appear in any record. Mesmer the Impaler, born of Marika and an unknown consort, not Godfrey, not Radagon, was sent into the realm of shadow as an instrument of divine conquest, and then sealed there along with the evidence of what he did. He burned the people of the Shadow Realm with fire drawn from a flame that predates the Erd-tree. He carried out what the DLC's environmental storytelling makes clear was a systematic extermination. The destruction of an entire people, the Hornsent, who had their own history and their own sanctuaries and their own relationship to the divine that Marika's expanding order could not accommodate. He was erased afterward. His name does not appear in the records of Leyndell. His existence does not feature in the lore available on the surface. The Golden Order's account of its own history does not include him. The realm of shadow is where Marika put the evidence of what she had done, and Mesmer is Exhibit 1, a son who committed atrocities on her behalf, and was then sealed away alongside the atrocities, so that the world above could remain beautiful. The Hornsent's systematic slaughter. The people who inhabited the realm of shadow before Marika's forces arrived had their own divine relationship, their own history, their own temples and sanctuaries and ways of understanding existence. The evidence of what was done to them is visible throughout the DLC in the architecture. The repurposed temples, the destroyed sanctuaries, the singular surviving Hornsent who travels with you and carries the knowledge of what their people were and what happened to them. Mesmer's fire was not a military campaign. It was an extermination conducted methodically, using a flame specifically suited to the task, leaving survivors insufficient in number to rebuild or resist, or even fully transmit what they were before it happened. The one Hornsent who accompanies you knows this. They carry it. Every conversation with them is filtered through the knowledge of what the divine order you are trying to restore did to their people. And they have not resolved whether helping you is an act of pragmatism or betrayal, or something they lack the language to name. They are the last voice of a people that was silenced before anyone outside the realm of shadow knew they existed. Radan resurrected without consent. Starscourge. Radan, who held back the stars with his gravity magic to protect the lands between's fate from being determined by celestial influence, who fought Melina to a standstill at the cost of his sanity, who was finally given release when you defeated him in the Radan festival, did not stay released. Miquella captured his soul after his death and placed it in Mog's body, resurrecting him in a vessel that was never his, to serve as the human component of a ritual for Miquella's ascension to godhood. Consort Radan, as he appears in the DLC's final boss fight, is Radan's soul in a body he did not choose, performing a function he did not agree to, in service of a god's ambition he had no role in deciding. He was freed. He was taken back. The man who sacrificed everything to protect the lands between's future was conscripted into someone else's future without his knowledge or participation, because Miquella needed a powerful soul, and Radon's was available and sufficiently impressive for the purpose. This is the final fate of the most noble demigod in the game. He becomes a tool. He serves as material. He is exactly what Alexander aspired to be, and it is not a good thing. The realm of shadow as dumping ground. The existence of the Shadow Realm is not revealed in the base game, but its function is legible from what the DLC places there. This is where Marika sent the things she needed gone. Messmer, who carried out the conquest of the Shadow Realm, and then became inconvenient. The Hornsent, whose destruction had to be contained somewhere. The evidence of Marika's origins, her methods, her choices that did not fit the narrative of the Golden Order as a benevolent cosmic arrangement. The Skagitry, which casts a shadow because shadows fall on things that are kept from the light. The realm of shadow is the lands between suppressed memory, the drawer where difficult things were put so they didn't have to be acknowledged. The attic where consequences are stored when they are too large to discard and too damaging to display. Everything Marika put there was real. Everything she chose not to put in the official record was a choice. The beauty of Lendel is in part the beauty of a place that has successfully forgotten everything that was done to build it. St. Trina confirmed, the base game leaves the connection between St. Trina and Miquella as an implication strong enough to be a reasonable conclusion, but never a certainty. The DLC removes the uncertainty. Miquella and St. Trina are the same being, two expressions of one Empyrean, structured in the same way that Radagon and Marika were two expressions of one divine vessel. The compassionate, sleep-giving figure who wandered the lands between granting merciful unconsciousness to the suffering was Miquella, operating under a different aspect, taking a form that allowed him to move through the world without the weight of his primary identity. St. Trina disappeared when Miquella was kidnapped by Marg, because when the person who generates an identity is imprisoned, the identity cannot continue without them. The items associated with St. Trina all carry a melancholy that makes more sense in retrospect. A being who knew what it was, who chose a gentler face to show the world, whose gentleness stopped when circumstances prevented it. What the DLC adds to this is the knowledge that Miquella's gentleness was also perhaps strategic. A face worn because it was useful, not necessarily because it was the full truth of who he was. Leida's collapse. Needle Knight. Leida is introduced as the most devoted of Miquella's followers, a woman who reordered her entire existence around service to a god she believed was genuinely good, who gave up her previous life and identity to become his instrument. She is competent and purposeful and has the specific calm of someone who has made their peace with the choice and sees no reason to revisit it. And then Miquella breaks his charm, and she has to revisit it anyway. Without the manufactured certainty, she must reckon with what she actually knows, and what she was actually told, and how much of her devotion was her own. The answer she arrives at is not a comfortable one. She turns her energy outward, toward preventing the wrong kinds of interference with Miquella's ascension, and in doing so becomes the most dangerous obstacle in the DLC for players who make certain choices. She was loyal. She remains loyal. But loyalty stripped of its manufactured clarity becomes something sharper and less precise, something that injures what it was supposed to protect. Leida does not become evil. She becomes honest. And honest loyalty in a world built on constructed devotion is genuinely dangerous. The Skagitry's function. The Skagitry, the great shadow tree that dominates the skyline of the realm of shadow, in the same way the Erd tree dominates the lands between, exists as a counterpart, but not a mirror. Where the Erd tree absorbs and recycles, the Skadi tree contains. It holds within itself the accumulation of everything the realm of shadow has experienced, the suffering of the Hornsent, the evidence of the conquest, the grief of a people who were destroyed and had no Erd tree to receive their souls. It is not a source of power in the way the Erd tree is. It is a vessel for what was not given anywhere else to go. The Skadi tree fragments you find scattered through the DLC, which increase your power in the Shadow Realm, are pieces of this accumulated history made into a strengthening material. You grow stronger in the Shadow Realm by absorbing the remains of what happened there. The tree that shadows the realm casts that shadow because it holds the weight of everything the light above refused to acknowledge. And the weight is enormous, and it has been accumulating for a very long time. Thiolie's faith survives. Thiolie, who followed Saint Trina into the realm of shadow and serves as her devoted companion in the DLC, is a man who discovers, as his questline concludes, that the object of his devotion is one half of a being who used love as a mechanism of control. He learns that Saint Trina is Miquella. He learns what Miquella has been doing with the love of his followers. He has this information fully available to him, and he continues. He does not abandon his faith in what Saint Trina represented to him. He does not recant his devotion. He holds what he knows, that the thing he worshipped was partially a performance, that his love was cultivated rather than earned. And he decides that what he felt was real regardless of the engineering behind it. This is either the most psychologically realistic response to disillusionment in the game, or the saddest, and the game does not indicate which reading it prefers. Thiolie's faith survives its object. Whether that is admirable or tragic depends entirely on what you believe faith is for and what you believe it survives on. The price of Miquella's godhood. To ascend to godhood, Miquella required two things: a powerful soul to serve as the human component of his ritual, which he sourced from Redan's corpse, and an offering at the gates of divinity, the nature of which the DLC leaves deliberately unspecified. He had followers. He had their love, manufactured or otherwise. He had a plan that he executed with the precision of someone who has had a very long time to think it through. What the game withholds is what he intended to sacrifice to complete the ascension, and it withholds this specifically in a way that feels like a question rather than an omission. The candidates are available. The people who followed him are there. The player character is there. The DLC ends before you learn what he intended to give up, and the uncertainty is the point. A god who used the love of his followers as both shield and currency may have had a specific planned use for one or more of those followers at the moment of ascension. The kindest being in the lands between is ascending to divinity through a process that required desecrating a dead man's soul, breaking the minds of his most devoted followers, and contributing to the destruction of a people in a forgotten realm. The means do not validate the ends. In Elden Ring, they never do. The Hornsent's unresolved grief. The singular Hornsent representative who accompanies you through the shadow of the Erd tree is not a character who achieves resolution. They carry the history of their people, the knowledge of what was done to them, and the awareness that you, the Tarnished guided by Marika's pre-programmed grace, are an instrument of the same divine order that destroyed the Hornsent. They help you anyway, because the alternatives are worse, or because they see in you the possibility of something different, or because survival requires pragmatic choices that don't have to be called forgiveness to function as such. But they do not arrive at peace. Their questline does not end with healing or understanding or any of the conventional narrative gestures toward resolution. It ends with them carrying what they carry, deciding what they decide, and being left with the weight of a history that has no reparation available because the people who could have made reparation chose to bury the debt in a realm most people will never find. The Haunsent's grief is not the game's to resolve. It is the game's to document. This is the correct decision, and it makes the DLC's emotional conclusion feel earned rather than false. The question Miquella leaves: open. There is no answer at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree to the question of what Miquella actually was. The game provides evidence for multiple readings simultaneously and refuses to adjudicate between them. He was the kindest Empyrean. He manufactured kindness as a mechanism of control. He genuinely cared for his followers. He used their love without informing them of what it cost. He sought to build something better. He used methods indistinguishable from the methods of the gods he sought to improve upon. His compassion was real. His compassion was strategic. All of these are true at the same time. And the game's final gesture toward Miquella is to leave you holding all of them without resolution. The most unsettling thing about the Lands Between is not that it contains monsters. It is that it contains people who believed they were doing good, who may have been doing good, who caused enormous harm in the doing of it, and about whom the game will not deliver the verdict that would let you put them in a clean category and move on. Miquella is the most extreme version of this, but he is not the only version. The entire world is built from this material. The question the Lands Between keeps asking, through its dead gods and its buried peoples and its bodies in the grass and its children who sing lullabies while forgetting who they used to be, is not whether good and evil exist. It is whether the people doing harm know what they are doing. Whether Rennala knows what her rebirth is doing to her sweetings. Whether Miquella knows what his charm is doing to his followers. Whether Marika knows what her plan is doing to everyone caught in it. Whether you know, as you walk through it, what your passage costs. The Lands Between does not answer. It presents. It shows you the faces pressed against the inside of the serpent's skin, the false stars painted on the ceiling of a buried city, the tarnished bodies lying in the grass, the children who have forgotten their names, and it asks whether you can hold all of that in your mind at once and continue anyway. Every player who finishes the game has answered that question. Whether any of them answered it correctly is something the game wisely declines to judge.